There's obviously been a lot of discussion and debate about no-fly zones.
We are speaking about closing the sky.
There has been talk of a no-fly zone.
Close the sky near Ukraine.
The issue of a no-fly zone.
To close or not to close.
So a no-fly zone is where one nation or perhaps a group of nations seeks to impose a level of air control over a country or perhaps a piece of a country. The important thing, I think, to grasp is that in doing that, those nations or that nation needs to be prepared to enforce that no-fly zone, which means you need to be prepared to shoot down enemy aircraft or perhaps attack enemy surface-to-air missile systems. We've seen them used before over the top of Iraq and elsewhere. That's the international community trying to put in place a level of air control to reduce the type of violent activity that's going on the ground. So in Ukraine, there's been a lot of debate about whether the West should put a no-fly zone over the top of Ukraine to try and reduce some of that pressure from Russian forces on the Ukrainian population and on their armed forces.
The reality is that setting up a no-fly zone would lead to a direct confrontation between NATO and Russia.
There are challenges to that. Militarily, you can do it. But those challenges mean you've got to be prepared to engage Russian and perhaps Belarusian aircraft and their service-to-air missile systems, and therefore that would be a significant escalation from a NATO perspective. So at the moment, the Ukrainian Air Force, and to be fair, their other armed services, are doing a fantastic job keeping some level of control in Ukrainian airspace. The Russians would have expected to take complete control of that airspace by now, and it's not happened. And that's down to probably the Russian Air Force are not quite as good as they thought they were, but it's also because of some really spirited, really brave, really innovative, really courageous resistance from the Ukrainian armed forces. If Ukraine were to lose that ability to at least deny Russia control of its airspace, then Russia would be able to roam freely across Ukraine from an air point of view. And that changes the tenor of this campaign quite significantly. Not only would it allow the Russian Air Force to target the Ukrainian armed forces and perhaps civilians, but also it would give the Russian command and control systems, their commanders, much better information than they're getting at the moment. So when I hear people talk about a humanitarian no-fly zone, I kind of doubt that they know almost what that means. The issue with no-fly zones is you have to be prepared to enforce them. So if this humanitarian no-fly zone was something that was voluntary, for example, then there'd be no reason for Russia to comply with that no-fly zone if it chose not to. It's a bit like shelling humanitarian corridors. It kind of promises a thing which perhaps it can't deliver.